So there's nothing more fearful than a follow-up to a bona fide classic horror film that no one was really asking for. So let's delve into the myriad of production problems and criticisms laid against the prequel to John Carpenter's 1982 film, also going by the name of The Thing. In the winter of 1982, a team of Norwegian researchers in an isolated Antarctic outpost discovered an alien ship buried deep beneath the ice. Shortly thereafter, paleontologist Kate Lloyd is recruited by her friend Adam Finch and his boss Dr. Sandra Halvorsen to aid in the excavation. The craft proves to be beyond their expectations, but the organism frozen in ice is the most startling find. Once transported back to the outpost, Dr. Halvorsen insists on extracting a tissue sample for study, despite Kate's desire for precautions. Regardless, the sample proves the organism to be unlike anything seen by science before, just as the frozen thing breaks for the ice block. Henrik is violently taken by the thing, which is soon is set ablaze by helicopter pilot Carter. However, the organism is spread like an unsuspecting virus amongst those at the outpost, hiding inside a perfect copy of each one of them. Carter and fellow pilot Derek attempt to take an ill Olaf to McMurdo for medical attention, but Griggs transforms and attacks those aboard, causing the chopper to crash. The shape-shifting terror is soon unleashed on Kate and the rest, using flamethrowers to destroy it, but the paranoia is already set in, not knowing who to trust as who they seem to be. Kate soon determines that the alien can't replicate inorganic material after seeing Henrik's metal plate expelled from his body, and loose fillings left in the bathroom prior to the chopper crash. Circumstances become more and more dire when most of the outpost is destroyed, and the thing in the guise of Dr. Halvorsen attempts to return to the spacecraft in order to escape. With no other choice, Kate and Carter follow it, but the fates awaiting them are far more grim than they ever could have imagined. So October 14, 2011 saw the release of this version of The Thing from Universal Pictures in Morgan Creek, and off a budget of about $38 million, it really did kind of replicate the initial box office success of John Carpenter's original because it only grossed about $31.5 million, making it a definite box office bomb, reportedly getting about $10 million or so in video rentals and sales in the next year or two, but still definitely a film that did not turn a profit for these companies. And this was very much kind of a long line of trying to conjure up some kind of follow-up to John Carpenter's 1982 original, which was critically savage at the time and did poorly at the box office, but it was very much that, again, that home video and cable system going out in that time. They really built up the audience, and people could go back and watch. It's like, man, this is a piece of absolute horror brilliance. It's one of his best films he's ever made, just like complete, utter classic on so many different levels here, that by the start of the 90s, Dark Horse Comics really just started to capitalize on it and actually fashioned a couple of comic book sequels. One was called Thing from Another World, followed up by Climate of Fear, Eternal Vows, then one that kind of disregarded all those other sequels and just did its own thing called Questionable Research. So these things went off about 1981 to 92 or something else like that, and they did pretty well. I've heard some mixed things about different installments of this type of thing, but it's kind of a thing to hunt down if you're very much interested in that regard. But then there was a highly successful video game that came out in 2002, developed by Computer Artworks, released on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Microsoft Windows. It was very well reviewed, very well received by fans, very well endorsed by John Carpenter. Actually had a voice cameo in the game, and a lot of people just consider it very much like almost the very much proper sequel to the John Carpenter film. It was kind of more towards like 2005 or so, where the Sci-Fi Channel was kind of working on maybe doing like a mini-series sequel to the entire film, helmed up by Frank Darabont, who was very much a close friend of John Carpenter. This guy gave us Shawshank Redemption and Green Mile, and eventually gave us The Walking Dead. So very much an acclaimed filmmaker who really would have a fantastic grasp on the material to respectfully follow up Carpenter's stuff, but for whatever reason, the entire thing just kind of dissolved after a certain point in time, despite the fact they had scripts written and a bunch of different concept art put together. But maybe it was a matter of cost, maybe it was other different things, or something else here and there in that regard. But seemed like something that was very much promising at a certain point in time, but just kind of didn't get to the points you need to get into production, despite the best efforts of certain people here and there. But get the success of the remake of Dawn of the Dead from Zack Snyder and James Gunn, and those producers involved with that remake were still tied in with Universal, and they're kind of looking through all the different properties that Universal had rights to and stuff like that, and they came across The Thing. And it was originally, doing the script on the whole thing, was Ronald D. Moore, famous for Battlestar Galactica at the time, and very much one of the most prolific Star Trek writers from Next Generation all the way up through different series, one of the best there ever has been. And he was very much working on a script where I did a lot of research in this type of thing, but the fact is, all the links and whatnot, I go through a lot of archive.org Wayback Machine searches to just try and find any information on it, but there was a script leak at a certain point in time, but the links are well dead at this point in time. You can't find them anywhere at all. Well past their prime of whenever you'll be able to get them. And the vague details of them don't sound too dissimilar from stuff we got, but there's at least a few details in what I read that hinted there was at least a slightly different script, even if it was just a different draft of what we'd end up getting. But despite the fact that Ronald D. Moore was involved in the entire thing, his script eventually got pushed aside, and they brought in Eric Heiserer, famously was part of the big writing team on the Nightmare on Elm Street remake that we don't talk about on the channel, except to trash it at every point in time we get. But he also did Final Destination 5, which I very much think is one of the best films in that franchise, and also penned Denis Villeneuve's Arrival several years later. So a guy who would definitely grow into showing that he has a lot of value in what he can bring to a script and a screenplay and filmmaking and all that type of stuff. So here and there and everywhere, he definitely had a lot of things talking about how a lot of stuff he put into that Elm Street remake very much got removed and changed around when he got on set. Very complicated type of stuff. So a guy whose track record on an IMDb page might not look the best, but some of the stuff does show through some quality here and there. But very much him going back and just kind of rewriting the entire thing almost from scratch. But there seems like there's some ideas that were very much in place that got moved along from Ron Moore's time into him that felt like they were still very much trying to hold on to the same core ideals, where they had certain things like real bad ideas for like a hot minute. It's like, oh, we're going to do a story around McCready's brother. He's going to be at this other station doing the same goddamn thing that Kurt Russell's character did. Like, they got rid of that pretty quickly. And they kind of moved it off here and there, defeating some ideas. It's kind of moving forward towards the female lead idea of getting, just because the original film just was all male, they want to at least try something different. I'm not trying to be as much of a copycat as we're going to get into here, but try to at least interject some other dynamic, some other idea, develop a different type of character in that regard. Very much, a lot of the reviews and stuff at the time, a lot of the critics were kind of like, yeah, this character of Kate Lloyd is very much taken off that Ellen Ripley sort of template and stuff like that. It very much is apparent in the film in a lot of different cases here. But how the script goes along, and just one of those weird type of things with this entire film, just trying to do a prequel, is a real kind of dicey business to such a degree, because you have to find a place to create a new story that has something new to tell that doesn't contradict what the original film did, and maybe not try to alter too much of the context of what that original film had there. So you're trying to add in a few extra cogs to the backstory of what you already had, but you can't betray what was already there. So it's such a thing, hard to be new and different when you're locked into the same endpoint that the original film starts from. So it's very much difficult to find some way to expand the story and do something different and go places the other film didn't, when you have such a set template of what you can and cannot do. And there's a lot of problems with this film. There's a lot of things I want to give credit to as well. But the fact is, when you're trying to do something that fits directly into continuity, this film has a lot of problems in that regard. And the director that got the helm this was Dutch filmmaker Matthijs van Heijningen Jr., and he didn't have a whole lot of things going on before this. Just a few minor things he was doing here and there. So he's very much a fairly unestablished filmmaker with a lot of passion to go for it, and where he wanted to work on this project to kind of honor John Carpenter's original, but not as bad of a situation I would make it akin to. But the first thing that comes up to me is like a little bit of David Fincher on Alien 3. A guy with a lot of vision, a lot of passion, a lot of commitment to the actual project, but doesn't really have the clout to kind of put his foot down to make sure that things happen the way he wants to in certain cases on the film, especially when we get up to the entire discussion regarding the special effects on the film from Studio ADR being replaced by CGI. But definitely a guy who does feel capable here. very much feels very capable of getting a lot of good qualities here. I like generally the style and approach he has here, because this is 2011. They easily could have been muscled into shooting this thing digitally in 3D and doing a lot of gags in that regard, but he wanted to make things as tangible, as practical as possible. He wanted to shoot on film, anamorphically, and stuff like that to make sure it had a certain sensibility that felt a little bit akin to a 1982 horror film. It opens with that 1990s Universal logo, so it feels like maybe it's like something that would come out maybe 10 years after the original film. So this is at least trying to do certain things that kind of tie it to a certain era. Make it still feel like it's closer towards that practical sensibility of filmmaking you had at the time the original film was made. The cinematography does have a very good sensibility from Michelle Abramowitz here, where they're very much conscious of just trying to kind of emulate the style of cinematography kind of present at the time the film is actually set in. They kind of make sure that kind of not exactly feels exactly like Kandi's work from the original film, but looking at like how films were shot back then versus now, whereas like now is a lot more soft lighting. Back then, they kind of work with more harsh lighting to some degrees or whatnot. So you kind of, there's just an intangible sense when I'm watching the films, like it does kind of feel with the color schemes, the lighting schemes, all the different ways they use this light and shadow in the entire film. It does kind of give me a little bit of an 80s feel to some degrees. Like it's a little bit of an intangible quality with the whole thing, but I do feel like from the cinematography, there's some great visuals in the entire film. I think they do some great stuff. Like I love the entire shot, and then the film where Joel Edgerton's character, who's revealed to be replicated as a thing, the entire blaze or the entire snowcat, that shot, gorgeous type of stuff. Really good eye for a lot of things in the entire film. It does look very, very good. I think it's a very visually strong film in that regard. And they set production of the entire film mainly up in Pinewood, Toronto between March of 2010 and June of 2010, with an additional location photography done out in British Columbia, Canada. And like I said, I think just the direction quality of the film is fairly good. All the actors are very well directed. I think a lot of the horror moments are very well handled with a lot of suspense, a lot of tension. There is some stuff that jumps out at you, but they're still like at least ratcheting up some moments that were just kind of like tightening up in some places here and there. They're using a little bit of suspense to very good degrees of the whole thing. And like I said, I think the cinematography film really stands out very strongly. But definitely the main criticism I had to get to up front here is the fact that despite doing supposedly so much research into the original film and trying to match things up from all the available material they had, trying to watch the film and check things out from still images and stuff like that to match things up with effects and moments and events and stuff like that, there's still a glaring number of things that are just like completely wrong. Just completely wrong. The main thing is the fact that in the original 1982 film, when the Copper and McCready come back from the entire Norwegian camp, they've got all the videotapes they had from all their expeditions and stuff like that out to where the spacecraft had crashed hundreds of thousands of years ago. And one of the things is the fact that they say, oh, they're playing thermite charges, and they blew the thing up to clear out and excavate the entire saucer. That's not in this film. It never happens. It absolutely never happens, because the filmmaker said, oh, it just didn't seem like it was very much realistic that the like 10 Norwegians or whatnot could plant a bunch of thermite charges to blow the whole thing up, so they just felt like that was important. Despite the fact that it's in continuity. It's directly in the continuity of the 1982 film, saying it absolutely happened. You can't just say, no, it didn't happen. No, they have videotape evidence that it actually happened. It's in continuity. You have to adhere exactly to what the 1982 film showed us, and they just brushed it away. Leaving it to like, oh, well, the ship at the end of the film trying to power up its engines and stuff like that, that melted all the ice. Well, that doesn't align with all the evidence we had from the 1982 film. So what's the thermite charge thing now? Where does that end up in the entire makeup of the whole film? Because now it's not there. So it's one of the main glaring errors, the main thing, because it's a big piece of the entire story there is seen in the entire film, but there's certain other things like with the two-headed creature, when it goes out on the entire snow and ice and whatnot, outside the compound and the camp. In the 1982 film, Copper and McCready find it where it's got canisters of kerosene laid out next to it. That's not the way it is in the 2011 film. It gets burned up with a flamethrower. There's no canisters of kerosene anywhere around it. It seemed like in the 1982 film, it's like they doused it and then burned it. That's not what happens in this prequel, so they blew that off. And there's also the thing where the one guy who does slit the throat and stuff like that. Well, look really closely, in the 1982 film, that gash across his neck is super, super deep. It's like inches deep on the whole thing. Almost like his entire head was about to come off. And that's not the thing. It's a very shallow cut in the 2011 film, so they didn't match the makeup effects in that regard. And the other thing is more of a behavioral type of thing. How the thing behaves in this situation where, in 1982 film, it's much more subversive. It's a little bit more just trying to hide inside a disguise here, unless it's actually threatened in some type of way. Well, in the prequel, you could have gotten away with having it a bit of a different behavior if it slowly adapted and changed how to approach doing certain things as it went along. Maybe because it's dealing with humans for the first time, maybe at first it's more brazen, but then it gets smarter, it gets more clever, it gets more subversive and stuff like that, but it doesn't. It really doesn't. The thing jumps out unprovoked, time after time through the entire film, and it just, there's no real reason to a lot of the times when it's actually acting the way it is. And so it just, a lot of things just conceptually wise, behavioral wise, stuff like that just doesn't match up in any type of way, and it certainly drives a lot of people nuts. If you know the John Carpenter film so very well, almost frame by frame, you can just pick up on the stuff really, really easily. And the only other offbeat type of thing is that in the odd TV version of the 1982 film, the Norwegian that gets shot by Gary is actually named Jans Bolen. He's not Lars. So that would be an easy thing to miss because it was only in the TV version, not in the theatrical release, not in the version Carpenter approved. It was supposed to be a deleted scene, but they added back in the TV version. So there's a lot of things to discuss on that end if I ever get to a video on that, but certain minor things in that regard, which is not important, but I thought it was nice to mention that regard. But being a little bit of an upswing here, talking about the cast in the entire film, I thought they did a very good job casting it, because for all these Norwegian camp characters, they actually cast a lot of Dutch and Norwegian actual actors, and there's a fairly small community in that regard, so all these actors really knew each other and very much friends, so that really added to the genuine camaraderie that all the characters actually have. So it's like nothing they really had to work on so much. They just knew each other and had all this type of stuff they could really bounce off of so much with their own personalities injected into these characters. But the real highlight I really want to talk about is Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and I think she's a phenomenally good actress. Just like, I haven't seen a whole lot of her, but everything I've seen from her is exceptionally good performances. Like, if you haven't seen the Netflix action film Kate, oddly enough, she's playing another character called Kate in this film, but if you haven't seen that action film, go watch it because she is just phenomenally good. And everything she does there, I just was completely blown over by what she's capable of. And I've looked into a lot of the stuff she's done in interviews, a lot of stuff she's done through her career. She's immensely talented with dance and song and acting. Great. I think she's just really, really good lead for the entire film here, playing the character of Kate Lloyd, a paleontologist who's recruited in the entire thing to unearth everything that's underneath the icing and try to be kind of a little bit brushed aside to such a degree, but she does such a great job carrying the film with a sense of gravitas and compelling conviction. I love that she does step up in a lot of different regards in the entire film. It's like there's certain things happening here. They're kind of freaking her out. She's got to take action, so she steps up in the entire thing. She's very convincing and very believable in that regard. You can certainly play a film where it's misogynist or something else like that, or people kind of dismissing her or something else like that. Certain things you could play in that regard, but she really wanted to have a character that had a certain agency of such about her, very much intelligence about what she does in the entire film, and she excels so much bringing that to this character. Even though there's a lot of stuff with how the characters aren't drawn quite as well as they're acted. I think a lot of the actors really elevate what's given to them to make much more compelling, engaging, endearing characters in so many different regards here. It's really what they're given on the page so much. I think she adds more to the character than what she's really given overall in terms of texture and details and traits and stuff like that. I think her quality of her performance here really excels what she can do in the entire film here. It really brings this character to such a way you can be very much empathetic what she's going through in the entire film. When she's got to burn people up, you can see the anguish and the pain she's going through looking at these people she's gotten a little bit of attachment to. Some people she knows better than others, but looking in the faces of these people, and she's just got to burn these people where she'd never think she'd ever be in a situation like this. It's just really good type of stuff. You really get that empathy through her performance, through her expressions, the way she handles herself in these sequences. Like, she goes through a wide array of different things. She's got that conviction, but she can sell the terror so well. The fear and all the creeping, crawling type of things going on all around her. She's thrust in these situations. Mary Elizabeth Winstead is so extremely capable of an actor to bring all the different qualities of a full, well-packaged character to the screen. Even though, like I said, there's not as much given into the substance of the character here, she brings so much out because the emotions can be so strong in the entire film that she can stand up and be around all these other actors and these characters and bring certain qualities I think are very much a strong lead to this entire film. I think she's just phenomenally, just brilliant actress. She very much stands out every time I see her on screen. I think the world of what she can do, and she delivers it every single time I've seen her do anything at all. So, great thing from her. Of course, Joel Edgerton. Now, he is playing the less cynical version of MacReady here, playing Carter. But he's such a good actor. He's another guy who's another person who's a very, very good actor. We know this completely. He's so very versatile, what he can adapt to, what he can bring to a certain role, what you can put in front of him, and he can just bring that out of himself and go off in any direction you need him to go into. So he's an immensely talented actor as well. And like I said, it's not as much drawn for the character, but he brings that earnest sort of charm to the character. There's a little bit of endearing quality they can bring between him and Winstead and stuff like that. You have certain qualities, good chemistry between them as well. I like that they hit certain sparks here and there. That never goes romantic, but it's very much a sense of camaraderie and trust and stuff like that. They're very good actors, and they bring a lot of different qualities that are very much compatible on screen so much. I think Edgerton, it's way more talent that this film allows him to really kind of express to such degrees where I think that is the case for a lot of different actors here, but he's so good that I don't think he's really capable of making a bad performance. I think he's such a good actor that he can bring whatever you want to the table, and he'll do it extremely well every single time. And then there's Ulrich Thomsen as Dr. Sandra Halvorsen, and this is a very stringent scientist. Like, this is the guy who's going to cause trouble, and this is apparently mapped on over top of like a character who's from the original Thing from Another World, this kind of cold clinical scientist and whatnot that was kind of being a little bit at odds with certain people, and it's like, it creates a little bit of a conflict in the entire film. There's certainly an adversarial friction the character creates when he's trying to look more towards his science and his research and preserving his discovery, and though a lot of people could really interpret the character as being kind of poorly written in that regard, it's like he's not really being intelligent scientist in that regard. He's being a lot more of a selfish jerk to such a degree. It's like when he goes on the hallway to talk with Kate after she had some objections to him taking the tissue sample from the ice. It's like, well, some safety precautions here. There's some unknown factors dealing with an alien species we know absolutely nothing about. And he's like, well, you're not here to think. You're just here to excavate the stuff from the ice and help me achieve this discovery and stuff like that. So it creates a little bit of opposition for her, some conflict for her to overcome against this guy to kind of exert some authority or whatnot when the things go a little bit in a weird direction here. So it creates something good for her character to kind of deal with and overcome in that regard. So well-performed character. Maybe some people have some problems in terms of how it's written, but still creates a good dynamic for characters to work off in that regard. So that's the kind of thing you really want, at least from a big ensemble cast, whatnot. Have some different personalities that conflict and have some different things to go off on, to have different dynamics for different characters, which the Carpenter film completely excelled at. This one's a little more minimal in that regard. There's not as many characters who really stand out in such great degrees to really just put a stamp so much on different people here, but it's like Eric Christian Olsen here as Adam, the assistant to Dr. Halvorsen. He's okay in the film, but there's not really any defining traits or any kind of substance of the character really kind of discuss him in any type of way. I do like two particular people here. You've got Jørgen Langhelle as Lars, and you've got Kristofer Hivju as Jonas here. I'm like, they're very, very good. I know they're trying to fit the Lars character into that mold of that character from the beginning of Carpenter's film who doesn't speak any English, while everyone else is kind of bilingual in that regard. I think that's kind of a thing for Norwegians, where they get taught English from early age and whatnot. So goes along to a certain degree, but the thing is, he does a really good job of this character who's not really able to communicate with the English-speaking characters in the entire film, but he's got such a great handle of the character here. It has a big, kind of fierce loyalty or whatnot. It kind of builds a little bit of a bond with Kate, and so there's just this, he's like a fierce dog or whatnot right next to her side the whole time, kind of barking at people and defending and stuff like that, and kind of like accusing people here and there. Very aggressive in that regard, but it creates a very good, memorable character in that regard. And I like the fact that the character of Jonas, Kristofer Hivju just got a really good sense of charisma on screen, a very eclectic personality, really kind of give a lot of vibrance to what he's going off on screen. So it's like these two guys really had a lot of good quality to bring to the screen here with very defined characters with what their performances could give to the entire thing. So I thought those two really did well, but everyone else is kind of decent. There's no bad elements in the entire cast here. It's just the fact that a lot of the characters kind of blend in the background. They don't stand out very well. And there's a lot more characters in this than there were in the Carpenter film. So there's a lot of people who just kind of blend in overall to just fill out the numbers or whatnot. So it's not as well drawn characters as I said earlier, but there's some actors in the entire thing bringing forth their talent to amplify and accentuate certain things that are much fuller in the performances than were on the page, I believe, in my regard here. But transitioning over to the score for the entire film, composed by Marco Beltrami, it's very much more modern sounding. It's not really kind of emulating the Ennio Morricone score from the first film. It's trying to incorporate a little bit of that theme here and there, not too much, but still trying to maintain a certain sense of identity for its own self. But I think it's still very effective. There's some fresh cues in the entire thing that really do amplify the suspense and the horror in the entire film. So I think it does a fine job, the whole thing. I don't think it's ever going to stand out the same way the Ennio Morricone was, but the fact is, it's a very good score that I think just holds up very well as a modern horror film score. But really the main thing we have to get into this whole thing, the really kind of like main crux thing that was so much of a stinging point for so many people when they saw the film and stuff like that, was the special effects. Now the entire idea here was the fact that they were going into this film intending to do the majority of things as practical effects, and they employed Studio ADI, Tom Woodruff Jr. and Alec Gillis, who had worked on a lot of the later Alien films and came up through Stan Winston Studios and established their own company by the early 90s. So they're very good, solid body of work from these guys. They know exactly what they're doing here, but I think a lot of the problems with the entire film came up through test screenings, because the thing was originally dated to be released in April of 2011, but it got pushed back 6 months for reshoots and to redo all the practical effects almost entirely as digital effects. Now the fact of the matter is, when you give a company like Image Engine, who's very, very good, who worked on District 9, who worked on Elysium for Neil Blomkamp again, worked on The Mandalorian and Game of Thrones, a lot of really high profile type of stuff that's gotten a lot of acclaim from visual effects end of things, you only give them 6 months to create all their digital groundwork for the entire thing. You didn't start this back in pre-production. You started this thing late in the game. So you only got 6 months to create all the digital models and render everything and composite everything and match all the different stuff. It's not nearly enough time. If they gave them from the beginning of pre-production, they potentially could have achieved better quality digital effects like you would have with like a Guillermo del Toro or something else like that, who would plan these things out well in advance and give everyone the maximum amount of time to develop everything properly. But when you don't give artists enough prep time, enough time to actually do the craft well, it's going to be detrimental to the entire quality of the film. And that's exactly what a lot of people involved with the film have said about those effects for it, because they just didn't have the time to really do it the right way. And the fact is, when you listen to the audio commentary for the film, which was recorded prior to the release of the actual film, filmmakers are making really thinly veiled sort of excuses and whatnot, why things are digital instead of practical. Like, we tried the practical, it just didn't work out very well. It's like they're very lightly covering for the fact that the studio made certain calls that they didn't have any control over, or like I said, you have a fairly new director on the entire scene who doesn't have the clout, he doesn't have the pull to really kind of put his foot down saying, this is the way I want it. He's not John Carpenter, he's not Ridley Scott, he's not James Cameron. He's not be able to make those calls and say, this is the way I want my film done, and that's the way it's going to be done. So they're really much at the whims of whoever's at the studio making calls or whatnot, so they didn't have a choice in the whole thing, so they're really just caught in a rock and a hard place. You don't want to talk and bash the film prior to release the film when the executives are listening to your comedy and stuff like that, and create a bad taste in their mouths or whatnot about employing you and stuff like that. So it's all really detrimental type stuff. But the director really did go on a couple years later on Facebook or whatnot, really explained a lot of different things that were supposed to happen with the film that didn't end up happening, including a lot of the creature effects and stuff like that, because there were supposed to be a different opening and a different ending. Now this all wraps around to this pilot creature that's, of course, named because it was the pilot of the saucer that was buried in the ice. Now the whole idea was this craft or whatnot was like picking up different specimens from different alien cultures and stuff like that, different planets, and making like a zoological sort of exhibit to the whole thing. So it's like supposed to kind of open with the whole thing being like a flashback back to like the opening of the first film when the thing crashes and kind of showing what happens inside the craft. And the fact is, the thing breaks out of its entire pod or whatnot, and it kills all the other inhabitants of the entire craft there. So the pilot gets slit and hung up and stuff like that. And that wraps back around to the end of the entire film when they're actually in the saucer and having all that type of climactic sort of cat and mouse type of thing going on the whole thing, where the thing was actually supposed to take on the form of that pilot after we see like a fossilized version of it laid out in the entire place. That all obviously got removed in the entire film, and they just kind of put this weird sort of Tetris-y sort of energy beam or whatnot that's supposed to represent something, a power source, God knows whatever. Just put in some random thing because they had to have the shots and scenes in there, but they just had to paint over the other stuff where they didn't have the other context to kind of explain what this other creature was in the entire film here. So I don't know exactly if that was supposed to be an opening to the film and maybe a flashback at the end of the thing, but they cut a lot of that stuff. It felt like they were trying to serve too many storytelling masters at the climax of the entire film, trying to explain this, that, and the other thing as Kate's going through the entire ship and learning these different things and seeing things and trying to put together the pieces together while you have this tension building climax going on. So it's like, it's if that was the case, it's too much of a bad structure in that regard. You can't be trying to just do too many things at the same point in time and trying to recontextualize things or try to explain too many things at the last minute is a little too much of a clunky type of thing. You just got to find a better place to insert the information to benefit the overall story. So that's a lot of reason why they did reshoots, because like, well, this thing doesn't really match what we're trying to do here in terms of tone and pacing and whatnot. So we had to kind of excise that and kind of stitch in a few other extra pieces here. And the other thing was the fact that as this thing takes on the form of the pilot creature, well, they changed all that thing to make it this Hoverson thing that's a completely CGI monstrosity in a certain way, kind of taking off the Blair thing from the original film, showing how unoriginal things get. And the fact is, it gets into a certain situation here where it's the same thing with the grenade, but it's an entire situation where she's threatening the thing to blow everything up, but then Joel Edgerton's character shows up, who we later find out is the thing himself, and plays this sort of psychological turn on the whole thing. It's like, okay, in the mind of that version of Carter there, okay, if I burn her to save both of us, then that blows everyone up. So if I go against the other thing and get rid of that and side with her, well, I can escape and kind of fend for myself in this whole thing. So interesting type of things, different sort of dynamics played in the whole thing to play. It's still a little bit psychological thing, kind of in retrospect. It's okay. A lot of these ideas for this climax are very interesting. In fact, a lot of these studio ADI effects look fantastic. A lot of these practical constructions they made, all the prosthetics, all the animatronic stuff, looks fantastic. Looks wonderful. They were going to augment certain things with CGI because not as much time to do everything as they did on the original film, which they had maybe close to a year or whatnot, or pre-production to kind of design everything, set things up, and Rob Bottin worked himself to absolute exhaustion on that film, doing all the stuff where he had to call in Stan Winston to do a little extra stuff for the dog sequence on that film. So exhaustive, totally exhaustive work on that thing. So they did as much as they could pre-production wise to design as much as they could to make as much the base core type of stuff, mainly practical stuff, and then augment it with the CGI afterwards, which probably would have worked out okay, but when you kind of like tip the scales, where now everything's got to be CGI and there are almost no practical effects left, it throws completely everything in such a wild direction here that just makes everything not stand out very well. Even though there's a lot of problems with the script and doesn't stand out very well, not well drawn characters, a lot of things are just completely like beat for beat templates off the original film. You're not doing a lot of interesting new stuff. You're just kind of replicating what they did before and just trying to package it slightly differently. But at least with the effects, they could have been salvaged to such a great degree. They could have been a major strong point in this whole thing if the studio didn't step in and felt like the audience reactions got in such a different direction that they didn't feel very good about. It's like, I just don't feel that good about the entire thing of what the studio did here, because Studio ADI had such great work and knew what they were doing in pre-production to know exactly what would be augmented with CGI later on. And so they could have done everything in a very high quality there to make sure everything blended very well and complemented one another. But fact of the matter is, it's a fairly unnecessary story. It's partly intriguing to a certain degree, kind of try to fill up those gaps in the story and see what you can do with it, if you could do something kind of interesting with it, but it really fails that because all the stuff they were trying to do with that got complicated with the storytelling and the pacing and stuff like that, so they kind of removed it, and left with a film that ventures to try to add new layers, but really does nothing to add to it. It's like, it's nice that they kind of like didn't end up doing the blood test thing again. They tried to do the thing where it can't replicate inorganic material, so they tried the fillings type of thing to kind of suss out certain people where it's not as foolproof in a certain way, but at least it's at least trying to do something different in that regard, not trying to replicate it as exactly, but it doesn't do enough new things to really justify its existence, the entire storyline telling in this whole thing. So it's a film, if you could take it on its own, it has good merits and it has potential to it. I see potential talent in the film. The film kind of bogs down and kind of claustrophobically suffocates a lot of the talent that you could possibly have in the whole thing. I think, again, Winstead and Edgerton are extremely talented. I think the director does have merit. The cinematography does have merit. Studio ADI always has merit for the quality of their effects work. Just a lot of people have value and quality and whatnot in what they can do here. It's just there's too many things at odds from what they can do here, and the fact that they're trapped in the box of continuity, doing a prequel, trying to match up with a film that they don't match up to. It's just like you're too trapped in the box and trying to break out and try to stretch out and do something different. If you did a sequel, you have more things to branch out to, do different things, but the fact is your end point has to match up with the beginning point of the other film, and they do fail to do that. In a lot of different cases, like there's a lot of different things that just don't make it good in that regard. So it's just a very interesting type of thing. There was a very interesting prequel comic that is digitally available for free on Dark Horse's website and their app. I read it over. The Northman Nightmare. It's good, but it's too rushed. It's a good storytelling. This doesn't even really fit in the continuity anywhere. It's just like a story told that happened a couple centuries ago with all the Northmen, Vikings, whatnot going off into Greenland and carrying this entire encampment and been ravaged and whatnot, and they find a couple women there who kind of survivors, and this one guy who as us as readers kind of figured the whole thing out. I was like, he's all freaking out about these women, they're dangerous and stuff like that. So it's a nice, interesting thing. It didn't have enough time to breathe. If this thing was like a 2-issue comic, it would have more time to breathe and have a little more connective tissue between different scenes, a little bit more time to just kind of tell the story a little bit more clearly. In some places I feel like there's a little too much choppiness in the story, but it's free to read. You just go on their website and find it. I'll put a link below to go check it out. I think it's all right. It's very well drawn, fairly well written and whatnot, but I think that would have been a more interesting film to make than this one, because it would have divorced you a lot further from continuity, and though it really doesn't fit anywhere in with a Carpenter film, because during this time the thing's still frozen in ice, buried in the Antarctic, so it still doesn't make sense with the continuity and whatnot, but still would have been a nice original fresh story to tell as an entire film. I think that would have worked in a very nice way. Let me know, guys. I really did a whole ton of research going through archive.org and various other things, looking at old blogs, looking through a whole bunch of stuff. So guys, let me know so much what you think about this complicated and fairly divisive prequel and whatnot. There's been some, not a major reassessment. Some people kind of like, it's a little bit better than it was, than Reputation has kind of nailed it down to be. Like, of course, there's a lot of problems with the whole thing, but I think a lot of that feeling and whatnot of what I've covered here is like there's combative, difficult things to kind of get over the whole thing. A lot of people really hate the film. I think there's at least a couple of filmmaking qualities here that are at least decent enough, at least quality-wise enough, to really kind of put your stamp on, say certain people did a certain quality effort here. Some of the stuff just completely got obscured and got completely screwed over, but I think there's enough filmmaking merit to give a lot of people shooting off in this film a lot more opportunities than this film really kind of gave them credit for and stuff like that. So the fact of the matter is, let me know your comments for the entire film below. You can always check out the commentary Steve and I did for the original John Carpenter film in 1982, and get off on our different things here on the channel to support us through Patreon, the Super Things feature below, and always just commenting, liking, subscribing, sharing links around social media helps extremely well. So you guys, thanks so much. Take care.